Hello. So I'm going to start on this channel doing something that I've been wanting to do for a long time, which is music and album reviews. Just for fun. I don't call myself a critic of anything. I like to talk about music. I love music. It's something I spend so much of my time listening to. So I just thought, why not, use my YouTube as a way to just sort of talk about my feelings because I love hearing what other people's reactions and responses and stories formed from the music are, so I wanted to share my perspective. I'm pretty much only going to be reviewing music that I'm a real fan of, unfortunately, but which would make me a little biased. But at the same time, I don't really like to trash something or talk about how bad it is. And I just don't have time in my life to listen to music that I'm not actually enjoying. And, I would have to actually listen to these albums in sort of, non-judgmental, like taking it in kind of fashion just for the sake of reviewing. And I wouldn't necessarily have the time to do that, at least at this stage. So for now, it's going to be just me going through albums as they come out is how I want to do this. But it's difficult, you have to wait sometimes for things. So I'm going into the past a lot, especially at the beginning, because there's just been so much music. Um, and I figured, well, what do I start with? Well, I might as well start with my favorite album of all time. Um, so I'm going to sort of start high and then go from there. I just figured it probably made the most sense. So today I will be talking about a album by a Grammy award-winning artist that I would probably consider at least one of my top three musicians of all time, Enya, or Enya Brennan. She is an Irish musician who gets categorized as New Age, although she herself does not believe her music is New Age. And I don't necessarily like that label either. It's its own unique brand of music. It's made alongside with Nicky Ryan, her producer, and his wife, Roma Ryan, who is her lyricist. And then she sometimes has guests play instruments, but most of the time she plays a lot of them herself, like the piano and such. So I am going to be talking about her, you could call it her third studio album, but technically it's her fourth if you include the Celts. It's really her fourth studio album, The Memory of Trees. This album was released on December 5th, 1995. Obviously, I was 2 years old at the time, so I was not able to witness this as it happened, but many, many, many years later, I fell in love with this album, and the first song I probably heard from this album as a very young child would have been China Roses. So I had sort of gateways into this album and other songs by Enya as a very young child, which is kind of interesting looking back because I would never have realized I'd become such a massive Enya fan as a young adult. But I didn't actually really start really getting into her music until only about 5 to 6 years ago, which it is what it is. Though I was familiar with her all my life to some extent. The Memory of Trees is often critically, I don't want to say ignored, but it's not one of the albums of hers, like Watermark, for example, that everyone talks about when they're talking about Enya. It didn't spawn her huge hit singles like Orinoco Flow or Caribbean Blue from Shepherd Moons, or Only Time from A Day Without Rain, which was her following album 5 years later. The Memory of Trees sort of went under the radar a little bit, and I can somewhat see why possibly that had happened, but I also, of course, definitely believe, in my opinion, it is her best work to date, although I love all of her albums, all for different reasons. I am not one of those people who thinks all Enya music sounds the same and every Enya album sounds exactly the same. I think that each album is very unique in the sound, and also you can tell in her development as an artist. And also, of course, there's age. I mean, she's been recording for 30 years now, so when she was a lot younger, of course, she sounds a lot different. And I do believe she was more experimental in her 30s when she was starting out with this project. And I will say that I am a fan more of her older work, but I definitely really do love her newer music. I will be reviewing Dark Sky Island in the coming months, which is her latest album by Warner Music. And And that comes actually 20 years after this album was released. So I know there's a long prelude for me talking about this album, but I had to just sort of explain my experience with Enya and how and why sort of this album is kind of sort of slept upon by a lot of even hardcore Enya fans to some extent. There are 11 songs, and I'm going to talk about each one kind of in order, as I will do with all of my subsequent album reviews. These aren't going to be obviously reaction videos because I've heard this music a long time ago. I'm not going to pretend I haven't heard it before. But it's interesting because some of these songs, I didn't necessarily hear all the album at once. I heard some songs way back when I was a kid at 5 years old for the first time, and I heard other songs just 5 years ago as a 19-year-old. So it's very interesting. This album spans my childhood. And when I finally really sat down and listened to this album as a whole, it was actually one of the first full Enya albums that I had purchased. And it was sort of my gateway into the rest of her music. So this album was released at a time when she was, experiencing immense commercial success off of her first two big albums, Shepherd Moons and Watermark. And so I can imagine she felt a huge pressure to follow that up. And I believe she succeeded. However, I think the fact that some people at that point felt like she was starting to sound the same and not reinvent herself made it seem a little not as interesting. I've heard reviewers say that this album in particular, The Memory of Trees, is not as invoking of sort of experimentation or of evolving sound. And it's more of her just sort of getting more comfortable with a certain very sort of soothing synth heavy sound, which she is known for, and that's not a bad thing. Her team, Enya, Nikki, and Roma, are very good at creating this, and it is just the three of them in the studio. So I'm gonna get right in. I mean, the theme of this album, it's the album cover is one of my favorite album covers of all time. And it is her sitting on this throne. It's actually in a reference to this painting by Maxfield Parrish called The Young King of the Black Isles. She has always used Maxfield Parrish as influence, especially in her earlier work and some of her music videos and imagery. And the fact that she used that painting for this album cover, it's a very striking image. It was one of the first things that drew me to this album, to be honest. It has, I think, her most interesting album cover she's ever done. And one of her best photo shoots that came out of it. I love the blue dress that she's wearing. I love deep blue anyway, mixed with the gold. It's very regal and royal and elegant. And then moving in through that, the tracks there's a strong, what she has talked about, a strong Celtic or Druid influence, more specifically, into some of this music. If you took the title, The Memory of Trees, it's actually referencing the ancient Druids, their religion based heavily on the trees. I mean, it was a very heavily pagan religion, and the trees were these, powerful, powerful beings. And a lot of cultures, specifically pagan cultures, did worship trees, but the Druids were known for very strongly believing in the power of them. As we know, they are very powerful beings, and I have always been attached to trees. So the theme of this album speaks to me very much. And I also think that the title, The Memory of Trees, is one of the best album titles I've ever come across. It says so much, and it really, really fits her music. Not just this album, I think it fits her entire catalog, to be honest. But this album definitely themes more towards I would say deep spiritualism and a very kind of, all of her music will do this, but this album is very, I don't want to say nature inspired, but I suppose it would be. There's one song where she says she was recording out in the Irish mountains, and the acoustic sound of it, you can tell, is different from being recorded inside in the studio. So there was a feeling of getting connected to the earth with this album. That, it's there in all of her previous work and subsequent, but this album really was about, not so much pretending to present yourself contemporary or connected to the current world. This was more of a timeless sort of getting deep, getting a little esoteric. And of course, I'm always into that. So without further ado, the first track of this album is called The Memory of Trees. It is an instrumental. I heard this song for the first time when I was probably around 5 or 6 years old, maybe 4. It was on her Paint the Sky with Stars compilation CD that my parents played in the car when I was around 5 years old. So it was 5, 6. So it was on there along with China Roses and Anywhere Is. So those were the 3 songs I heard way before I listened to the rest of this album. This song, it says so much without obviously needing lyrics. I have read that although she doesn't have lyrics for this song, she is using a type of, I believe, Scottish sort of vocalization technique, where you kind of do almost speak a language, but not quite, because she does vocalize a lot in this track, and it almost sounds like it could be a language, but it's not. It has a very, 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 I mean, I guess you could say it fits the title the best. I mean, it just makes you think of nature. It just makes you think of landscapes. The melody is a landscape, as I like to explain it. And this is indicative of the style that she really hones in on the rest of this album. It opens up on a very melancholy tone. The first few notes through the synthesizer are very melancholy, and then it gets very hopeful. And then it kind of goes back and forth between getting somewhat very melancholy and getting very hopeful. And that is a theme in this album that is huge, huger than anything I've ever heard in music before. I mean, this album spans really, really, really sad themes and melodies and really, really hopeful tones. They blend together so much. And it doesn't feel schizophrenic. It feels meant to be. It's a very flowing melody. It goes from minor to major so effortlessly and so seamlessly. And one of the things you will hear me complimenting the most about this album throughout is just melody. This album is all about melody, and it's the biggest thing that catches my eye when I'm thinking about and listening to music. I'm actually more of a melody person first, lyrics second, and then I don't know how I think about instrumentation. Usually it would come actually second and lyrics third, but it depends on the song. If the instrumentation is very subtle and not there, then it will be third. I don't really think about it very much. The melody comes first, and then the lyrics, and then somewhat the instrumentation and the background, or the beat and production. Otherwise, it generally will be the melody first. And so for a lot of these songs, I didn't even know what she was saying, especially when I was a young child. And it was just the melody. I didn't know what language it was. Sometimes it's hard to understand. And it was just so beautiful to hear her sing. The next track, Anywhere Is an example of that. I heard it when I was young, and it's got this hugely positive, energetic, pulsing rhythm. To the delivery, to the production, the strings. It's so lively and hopeful. It contrasts Memory of Trees, the opening track, very nicely. It's what it would be her, it would be her pop song from the album. Every album had somewhat a song that could cross over to radio. It was a single. It had an amazing, very trippy music video, which I'm a real fan of. And I think it's classic Enya in terms of how she can use a really, powerful, pulsing rhythm and really eloquently sung vocals to make a almost pop song just so endearing and so captivating. And the lyrics are very, very deep. I mean, it talks about the shells upon the warm sands have taken from their own lands the echo of their story. But all I hear are low sounds as pillow words are weaving and willow waves are leaving. But should I be believing that I am only dreaming? I mean, the rhyme scheme is excellent, but obviously her lyricist Roma takes these very abstract ideas and puts them to paper in a way that you don't often see a lot of writers employ. It's definitely abstract writing and abstract poetry, and it fits her music. It's just so well punctuated, so the words feel like it feels like the lyrics, it really took a long time for them to create, because it was just, I mean, I know that Enya always thinks about her music first as melody, similar to how I would, vocalizing, no words, no lyrics, and her lyricist will then take the song way later after it's finished and put lyrics to it. And the lyrics have to fit the melody. but they also have to fit whatever Roma might be, trying to go with the theme of the song, or what Enya is trying to portray with the story of the song. And so they work so well together. And Roma seems, through her writing, to be such a fascinating individual. She is a poet who writes her own poetry in Ireland. And I only can imagine just sort of having the conversations with her about these things, and the conversations that Enya and Roma must have in the studio, because they often talk and go back and forth with each other of ideas for music. And ideas are often born through that. So I'd really like to be on a fly on the wall for those conversations. So after Anywhere Is, we're all pumped up. We go into a very, what I would call probably the most sinister track of this album, Pax Deorum, which is Latin for Peace of the Gods. And she sings in Latin on almost all of her albums, so this is no exception. This song was actually recorded almost 10 years prior, when she did a BBC production for the Celts. And they never used it for that documentary. Her album, The Celts, was songs collected from those recordings. And so they decided to refurbish it and reuse it for this album, to my understanding. And I think it's perfectly placed because, we got the theme of this album. We had the really swooping instrumental that sweeps you up emotionally, and then we had the lyrics, which sort of place you in this hopeful sort of esoteric stance. And then you have this song which introduces you into a story. The music starts with just the sound of waves crashing upon a beach in a storm, or of some kind. And it evokes sailing. And of course, that's a theme in a lot of Enya's music, is traveling across oceans. So this song, through the Latin lyrics, is very much beat-driven. It uses something that she's very fond of using, which is very hard. I guess you'd consider it part synthesizers that really pulse and echo and reverberate. And it's such a beautiful production. I mean, Nikki does an amazing job with these productions. With then a break in the bridge, which, again, like I said, from sinister to serene in 2 seconds. You're suddenly just swept up, and it's like akin to being swept up in the waves, but then like the eye of the storm, it's the calmest. You're suddenly in this eye of the storm, and you see like the sun for the first time, and suddenly the waves are, calming down, and things feel serene and peaceful and hopeful. And then you realize you go back and dive back into the climax of the song, which features some high soprano vocals by Enya, with, of course, tons of overlays, as she's often employs, almost always, and ends on this sort of very, a bit more kind of somber, a bit more ritualistic tone. It's definitely a sort of revoking ancient ritual. A lot of her music can do that, and I really appreciate that. It's just so unique. Which then takes us into the fourth track, which is, I'm probably going to pronounce this horrible, it's in Gaelic. Ether ar Niem is how I'm going to pronounce it. It means Father in Heaven, loosely. And this track is sort of what you would probably consider church music to some. Every album of hers does kind of take things into somewhat of a religious context. And this album definitely, if you listen to the lyrics translated into English, has a very Christian theme to it. Father in heaven, God help us. My soul, my heart, my voice, praise to you, O God. With other beautiful sort of melancholy lyrics, long is the day and peaceful, long is the night without gloom. So it goes back and forth with this, but it does have praise to you, O God, repeated quite many times. It's interesting because when I listen to the song, and you of course don't understand Gaelic, I don't necessarily think about church music, Christian church music. Enya's relationship with Christianity, I mean, she was raised Catholic and she loves churches, but she's always said she picks what she really likes about religion and Christianity and then sort of leaves the rest. And she wouldn't consider herself a devout Irish Catholic by any means. But she does love churches and loves the choral music and, the connection and spirituality of it. And that's very similar to how I feel about Christianity, because I was raised Christian as well. So this is the kind of church music that I love, and the kind of, if you could call it church music, I wouldn't call it church music, but it's the kind of music that I would want to sing from a hymnal, because it's not too heavy on the, superlatives of the great mighty God. But it's not necessarily the lyrics that are obviously the key thing here. I didn't even really read the lyrics until recently. I was just so hooked on the melody. The melody and instrumentation is just, there's a bit of a harp in the background, which I love. I wish she used harp more often. Because Enya and a harp, I mean, that's a match made in heaven. And it is just so relaxing. But beyond that, it's so introspective. Yeah, it's so serene and calming, and it takes you to a place that is just so um, reflective. It has this essence of reflectiveness to it, of looking back, of a bit mourning to some degree, but this is a song of praise. This is a song of gratitude. So it's not necessarily the most melancholy of tunes. The fifth track is a piano instrumental. She's a big pianist and does amazing instrumentals on all of her albums. This is called From Where I Am. It's a really short track, but it's just the perfect sort of interlude between the previous and the next track. And I fall in love with this piano piece. It's my favorite piano instrumental of hers behind the instrumental of Watermark. That would be my favorite instrumental. It's so reflective. This song, the way the melody is composed, I mean, I'd really love to learn to play it on the piano, but it just speaks so much to me about, the title is called From Where I Am, and it seems to me that it's written in a place where you do feel like you've come to a place where you feel like you've made it. You have come to somewhere where you feel like you belong, but you're remembering the journey that got you there. You're remembering the very, very difficult, arduous road that it took for you to get to this place of calm. That's how I interpret it, because it definitely goes between major and minor, melancholy, happy. It's a theme I'm just gonna keep repeating in this whole album and almost all of Enya's music. And so the swell and flow of that is just so captivating. It brings tears to my eyes. I have to just, it could be interpreted as someone who's missing a lover and is writing to them from from afar, moved to another country. It has that feeling a lot of longing for someone to be close with you. Like, I'm sending you my love from where I am here. And I wish you could be with me. But I'm also happy where I am here. That's the thing. It's that hopeful. It's not like I completely hate where I am. So it leads, actually, I think, brilliantly into my favorite track on this album. And it is one of my favorite songs of all time. I would probably rank it as like my third or second favorite song of all time, which is China Roses. I first heard this song when I was, again, about 4 or 5, and just fell in love with the melody. Again, before I even understood what the lyrics were about, took me a long time to get into the lyrics. The lyrics are something else. I mean, this is pure poetry. But I could spend forever just talking about the melody. It's a very waltz. In some ways, people consider it a prototype to her song "Only Time." I don't necessarily see that comparison, although there is a similar structure to the song structure itself. But it definitely has a like a sort of danceable, waltzy rhythm to it that flows back and forth, with this soaring melody that her voice just crystal clear carries throughout the whole song as it shifts from major to minor, just so effortlessly. With its ending instrumental, or this ending sort of distortion of her voice looping and looping and getting quieter and quieter and quieter. I mean, it's the definition of soothing. My love of this song is not so much the fact that it's like, oh, this is so soothing, it calms and relaxes me. For me, this song evokes so much imagery and emotion. So much imagery. You have this title, China Roses, which is only briefly mentioned. It's sort of like an anecdote. The song isn't about China Roses. The song is about heaven, from what I can understand. I know that if I have heaven, there is nothing to desire. It's really takes a lot of, soul searching to understand what you want in your life and how your reality can truly become heaven. And this song, with references to different, very real earthly things and very extra earthly sort of things, like the Sappho comet, angels' tears beneath a tree. It's like, what does that even mean? But it's this emotion of the words and the like linking between that. In terms of poetry, it's always what I'm looking for in really good writing. And the writing is just A plus. I can't fault this writing at anything. I mean, it fits the rhythm and melody. I can imagine the words were very, very, very painstakingly picked to fit this song, and yet it doesn't feel forced. It feels so soothing and natural. It doesn't feel like the words aren't meant to be there and they were just haphazardly placed on top of a gorgeous melody. So this is a song I could talk about for so long, but it is just a sweeping rhythmic cocoon of healing and restorative energy. And I always will listen to this song all my whole life. It'll be one of my favorites. And it's the kind of song I'd want to play for my children. It's the kind of song I'd want to play at my wedding. You know, it's for the first dance. It's just exquisite. And you could take it on the surface as being just sort of a very, very feminine sort of, I love roses. This is a romantic night. I'm with you. I'm in heaven. This is awesome. I choose to take her songs a little deeper than that because I know that the way her team works, it's always about something much deeper and much more abstract and intangible that they're trying to describe. It follows instantly by a song that takes this to a little bit more of an, I don't want to say less abstract level, but we get a song called Hope Has a Place, which is a lot more, I think, upfront in its meaning. It's not showered in metaphors and abstractions in the lyricism. It's speaking of, true love and the hope of true love always finding its way home into your heart. If you feel like, to me at least, if true love is something that can never find its way home in your heart, it always will have a place there. Your heart always has room for love and also room for hope. And it's a very hopeful song. It's a very, it's a song that you can feel pain behind the melody and the lyrics, but it's so hopeful that love will return to this place. That we've seen how love can rebuild and grow from nothing. And this is the song that she did say that was recorded outside, which was a very interesting sort of new take for them in sort of the mountains of Ireland. And it does have a sort of airy atmospheric feel to it that I don't think any of the other songs have on the album. So I can pick up on that. It's very, 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 very hopeful in tone. And we have the third instrumental after this called Tea House Moon. Now, if I were to be completely honest and I had to pick a least favorite song, this one and the following song would probably be the two songs that don't stand out as much to me. They're beautiful songs, but they are a bit more on the filler side. This one is a instrumental that is inspired by Japanese tea houses. If I'm correct, I believe Enya visited one and was very inspired. Tea House Moon is such an interesting title. It very much follows the sort of lyricism that you would expect from an Enya song with that title. But it's a short, just nice sort of synthesized. I'm not entirely sure. It feels almost like sometimes the piano is in and then it's out. It's a very sort of depicting a certain scene. A lot of music, Enya's music, is about a moment, a feeling, a particular environment. And this song, although for me it doesn't necessarily always remind me of Japan, this song is somewhat a love letter to Japanese tea houses. But it's a lot more than that, I believe, and that it has a very sort of storybook, childlike innocence to it that could make you think of really a tea house that was on the moon or as high in the trees as it could be close to the moon. Anyway, has a very childlike innocence to it, which a lot of her music, especially her instrumentals, employ to give it something that I really think would make it really endearing for children's imagination, as well as the adult who has an open imagination in mind as well, for the kid in all of us. The next track is called Once You Had Gold. This is a very hymn-based track in a vein that's a little bit similar to Hope Has a Place. It's not my favorite on the album, just because it's sort of similar to a lot of other songs that she has recorded, especially subsequently. I think at the time it might have been kind of nice, but now there's so many songs that follow a similar theme, and I don't want to say more I mean, it's hard to call it basic because there's nothing basic about Enya's music. But when you come from songs like China Roses and Anywhere Is, it just it kind of pales in comparison in terms of the depth of the song. But it does speak about, you know, the changing of life and time, and how once you had gold, you know, but now, you know, what do you have? You know, how can you make gold again? It's sort of a, you know, um, like an ethical, you know, sort of dilemma song. And it's almost, it could be viewed as someone talking to their ex and saying that, you know, this didn't work out. It was so perfect. What happened? Um, but yes, the next track is one of my favorites, and it's going to be really hard for me to explain this, but it's called La Sonadora, which means the dreamer in Spanish. It's the only time she's ever sung in Spanish. I think it's really interesting and awesome that she chooses to speak in languages that are not her own. She is bilingual. Gaelic is her first language, with English as a second language. In the area that she is from Ireland, that is very common. And this is her adapting the Spanish language to the melody. I've heard her say that, you know, it wasn't originally going to be in Spanish, but she felt that the lyricism of the Spanish language fit the melody so much better. And I think that's so awesome that she tried it out in all these languages and decided Spanish was the one. It's a nice tribute to people, you know, to someone who's Spanish to begin with, because she has such an international fan base. So I love that she does this in later albums, picks other languages to sing in, and I'd love to see her do more in other languages. But the song is very abstract. I mean, this is the definition of dream-like abstract New Age music, and esotericism. The lyrics in English translate into I the autumn, I the evening star, I have been an echo, I shall be a wave, I shall be the moon, I have been everything, I am myself, I the summer, I the ebony, I am the dreamer. So you can sense the fact that this is, you don't almost need to know the lyrics to get the idea that this is about dreams, but it's also about the infinite limitless of the mind and consciousness, to me at least. It's one of the probably most esoteric songs Enya's ever recorded or put to tape. It's fitting to be towards the end of the album because it has a very cathartic bridge that really culminates. I mean, I don't know if you would call it necessarily a sad melody, but it's definitely not a hopeful one. It's almost a bit sinister at times, or a bit intense, but it's beautifully intense. And then it flows and climaxes into one of the most beautiful, heart-achingly positive bridges that are not sung in any language. It's just her vocalizing in such a, you know, I mean, it just, the first time I heard it, there's nothing else like it. I have to be honest. This is just one of the reasons why this album is on the top of my lists for everything. The first time I listened to this song, I was just literally floored. And this was one of the songs I didn't listen to because it's a deep album cut. It didn't like get put on that playlist I listened to years and years ago as a kid. I didn't hear this song until 5 years ago, and it was the song that made me get this whole album. I just was like, this is the kind of music I'm talking about. It feels ancient. It feels primeval. It feels otherworldly, but I don't find it, sometimes it's a bit pompous when artists try and do that, like they're trying so hard. This doesn't feel like that at all. It's effortless, and will always stand out in my mind as one of her better deep cut tracks of any album. So it culminates and sweeps us up in this sort of enigmatic melody and rhythm to culminate with the album closer, which is On My Way Home, which is actually the fourth song I did hear back when I was a kid. I forgot to mention that earlier. This is a very hopeful song. It was the second single released from this album. There's a really beautiful music video that was released for it. This is the perfect closer to this album. It's very interesting because when Echoes and Rain came out 2 years ago for Dark Sky Island, Roma and Nikki and Enya were talking about Echoes and Rain being the answer song to Orinoco Flow. But to be perfectly honest, I always felt like they were forgetting that On My Way Home existed, because On My Way Home, to be perfectly honest, is the answer song to Orinoco Flow. Orinoco Flow is the beginning of a journey. On My Way Home, with all the hopefulness and excitement of going to new places and the unknown and mystery. And On My Way Home is the triumphant return home. You know, you've been places, you've seen things you could not imagine. But you know what? You're starting to feel homesick. And that's a good thing. You realize it's time to go home, at least for now. And it's time to make that journey back. And I could view it also as someone reflecting upon their whole life. You know, the music video shows her as a child represented by an actress and her reflecting back on her life. And I view this song a lot in that regard as well, as oftentimes you go back to your childhood and you relive certain moments in your life and you want to go back home. And this song, I mean, through the organ intro and the uplifting, super uplifting melody, just really gives you this feeling of life marches on, but we can return back home in our minds or physically, and it's very important that we do so. And there's always an end to a journey, but it's not a sad thing. So Echoes in Rain to me is more of like the middle. It's more like, well, we're halfway through this journey. Let's keep going. Let's motivate ourselves. But I do not see Echoes in Rain as the closer to what Orinoco Flow was. In fact, On My Way Home actually samples Orinoco Flow with the turn it up, adieu part of Orinoco sampled in On My Way Home, just to highlight this fact. So anyway, it's just interesting, and it's a good example of how this album isn't really talked about. In fact, this is the one album of Enya that she has not really, she's given the least info about. She's a very mysterious person to begin with, in that she doesn't share very much, but she does like to talk about her music. But with this album, we have the least amount of press interview. We have the least amount of magazine articles or interviews of her explaining this album, or Roma or Nikki. It's the most sort of enigmatic release they've ever made. And it does get kind of forgotten about. And so that's why this video has to be so long for me, because there's just so much I have to say. My other reviews may not be this long, but this is my favorite album of all time. I can't not make it a super long video. I hope that for other Enya fans out there who might stumble upon this video, that you agree or have the same kind of ideas about what this album meant to you, or if it was different. I mean, I always love hearing what certain songs mean to certain people and where they heard them. A lot of her music will always remind me of being in the car as a child and the innocence of that, because I listened to her a lot as a child. But it's always, you know, it changes with your life, and her music is timeless. I'll be listening to this album when I'm 80 years old, and it'll still ring true in my ears as if it just had come out. I can only imagine what it would have felt like if I had been feverishly anticipating this album back in 1995 when it did come out, because I mean, it would have just blown me out of the water. But even then, all these years later, it's almost the same age as I am, this album has made such a huge impact on my life and inspiring me creatively as an artist. So much inspiration. So thank you, Nikki, Roma, and Enya, for creating all of your music. But for this album in particular, that's often underappreciated, I could not compliment this enough. So, you know, it's definitely a 5 out of 5 Enya album for me. I am a biased Enya fan, but hey, you know, I can see what some people say about the repetitive, almost lullaby-esque, similar sounding songs of some of these songs. You know, Hope Has a Place, Once You Had Gold, Ather Arniem, China Roses. Some would consider them to sound the same, but I think that listeners not really discerning enough the differences and uniqueness of a lot of those songs. And like I said, some of them I'm not as crazy about as others, but it's rare that an album, every single song overpowers and becomes the best song. It's actually, I think, a little too much when that happens. All right, so 40-minute video on Enya, it just had to be. I will be continuing to make reviews of albums that I will go back into the past and review. There's a ton. Oh my God, I don't know where to start. But I will also be reviewing albums, ideally a couple days or a day after they release. So the first album I'm looking to review as it releases is upcoming Lust for Life by Lana Del Rey. That's the first one that is sort of coming in the pipeline. But I'll hopefully continue along the line and review albums as they come. So thanks for watching, and if you like this video and you want to see more reviews of artists, please hit the subscribe button. I do a lot of different things on this channel, so this is sort of just an experiment, but I really would like to continue doing this semi-regularly. And I also would like to review movies as well sometimes, because the movies also are really important to me and I always love to talk about them. So until next time, thanks for watching, and I hope for any Enya fans out there, this was a really fun video that you could sort of share in our Enya appreciation. And I recommend Enya to anyone who is not familiar as well. And I recommend this album as well. It's not usually the top one that people recommend. So with that, I will wish you all well, and till next time, thank you. Bye.